It's Election Sunday. Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our second ever live on-camera edition of UnScripted, the Cardiac Hill podcast. I'm your host, Corey Cohen, and we have three full guests here on this roundtable edition. We will start off with Jim Hammett. Jim has been my partner in crime for a lot of the episodes of UnScripted when we're just audio and it's only podcasting. But we do have Jim here. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Election Sunday.
I'm doing well. Pitt's in the tournament. I just spent the weekend in D.C. following the team at the ACC tournament, so I got March Madness running all through me.
Fantastic. The other person, we've got two others. We've got J.D. Schroeder. You might know him as Static on the podcast. J.D., how are you?
I'm doing well. Pitt's back in the tournament, which is how it should be.
Fantastic. And we have Chris Bruno on the podcast as well. Last time we had you, there was no video. Now we've got to see you. Chris, how are you doing?
Yeah, I apologize to all the viewers for that. They are going to have to see me today, which is unfortunate. But
Absolutely. So, the breaking news is that the Pitt Panthers are in the NCAA tournament, and they're a 10 seed. They're going to be playing Michigan in the first round of the tournament, and if they win, they've got Xavier, and if they win that, then they've got the West Virginia Mountaineers. But we're going to start off, we're going to be talking about the NCAA tournament as a whole. We're going to be talking about the bracket and all that. But let's start with Pitt. And the question that's on everyone's minds is, was Pitt seeded correctly? They got the 10 seed. There was all this question, does Pitt get in? Are they going to be the first four? They're in. Jim, does Pitt deserve this 10 seed that they got?
I think so, and I guess you could make an argument that they could have been in the 8 and 9 game. They have, a fairly good RPI, a couple quality wins with Duke and Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, 21 and 10, 21 and 11, 9 and 9, 1 and 1 in the ACC tournament. They're about right, and you can almost argue that being a 10 is better than being an 8-9 because you don't have to deal with the 1 seed the next day. So maybe, in a way, it's a favor, whether intentional or not. And, looking at seeding, you have to look at what Syracuse, them getting in, has to make Pitt fans feel that they were definitely in all along because Pitt beat them 3 times. They have a 20-point RPI difference on them. So, 30. I think they're the 37th overall seed. So, to me, that's right.
Very interesting. JD, what do you think? Does Pitt deserve the 10 seed? And do you think, as Jim said, that the 10 is better than an 8 or 9 that they could have gotten?
I definitely agree with Jim in that, definitely in this situation, the 10 is a lot better because instead of going against a UNC team that the first time Pitt played them absolutely destroyed Pitt, and then the second time, they hung, tough for 3/4 of the game, but that last 10 minutes really showed you why UNC is a number 1 seed. But instead of UNC, now they get a team like Xavier, who is a very good team, but certainly not nearly as, an indomitable force that I think UNC is. I kind of think UNC's going into this tournament a little bit of a favorite to win the title in general. In terms of whether Pitt's 10 seed was fair, I definitely think it was. Pitt had a ton of chances to get top 25 and top 50 wins, and they ended up with 2 with Notre Dame and Duke, but they lost all the other ones. So they didn't have a huge amount of good wins, but the other half of that coin is they really didn't have any truly bad losses. I think their worst loss was considered NC State, and they were just outside of the top 100 in terms of RPI. So it's really not – it was definitely they didn't beat too many great teams, but they didn't lose to anybody terrible either. The ACC was pretty deep in general this year, and so Pitt kind of benefited from that a little bit in terms of the numbers game when you started looking at teams in that respect.
And Chris, so as JD just mentioned, the ACC was a pretty deep year, and the NCAA seemed to appreciate the ACC because, as we saw, they put 2 ACC teams at number 1, UNC, who won the conference tournament, but then also Virginia. On top of that, Syracuse got in as a 10 seed. The Panthers, obviously, a 10 seed. So do you think, again, that the Pitt was seeded correctly? Do you think that the NCAA selection committee seeded the ACC in general? Do you think that they gave them maybe too much credit, or what do you think?
I don't think they gave them too much credit. I think it's a very strong conference, especially at the top. I think Pitt was seeded correctly, as Jim and JD have mentioned. I'd rather be in that 7-10 game than that 8-9 game. And once you're looking at 8, 9, and 7, 10, I think those seedings are kind of interchangeable. People might be upset that they're a 10 seed that low, but you can easily say they're a 7 seed in that game, just like you could say the 8, 9s are always kind of interchangeable.
Very interesting. I happen to agree with all of you. I think that the 10 seed is fine. Maybe they deserved a 9 seed, especially compared to a team like Syracuse that got a 10, but as everyone's really said, you kind of prefer the 10 seed. You pull the upset, you play a 2 seed that, could be beatable, certainly more so than a 1 seed. Now, looking at the first round matchup, before we get too far into this, let's talk about Wisconsin. It's the battle for Paul Chryst here in the NCAA tournament, and the Panthers will have a matchup with the Badgers. Wisconsin, many people know, they started out with Bo Ryan as their coach this season. He left, the team slumped for a bit, and then they went on a run, and they've been pretty streaky, but they've lost their last 2. JD, what do you think about this Badgers team? Do you think it's a squad that the Panthers can beat, or is this going to be a pretty tough matchup as a 7 seed?
Well, as I just described Pitt as a team that didn't really beat too many great teams but didn't lose to too many bad ones, Wisconsin's the exact opposite. They lost to some very bad teams like Georgetown, Western Illinois, a couple other teams like that early in the season. But then towards the end of the season, they beat Michigan State, they beat Maryland, they beat a bunch of good teams, towards the end or later half of the season. And I think over their last 14 games, they're like 11-3. So they definitely surged at the exact right time that you would want to. They did lose their last 2. One was a tough game at Purdue, which Pitt lost to Purdue at home, so it's certainly Pitt fans can understand losing that one. They did lose to Nebraska at home, which was a little bit of a head scratcher for most people, or not at home, excuse me, in the Big Ten tournament. But I do think Pitt matches up better with this team than other ones. Wisconsin's guards aren't exactly known as quick and scory, so I think traditionally Pitt has always had trouble with those type of teams, especially when you look at the teams that have knocked Pitt out of the tournament. That kind of seems to be, the MO of most teams that have knocked Pitt out. So I think it's a pretty good matchup, but I still recognize Wisconsin's playing really well, and they're playing well at the right time.
Chris, what do you think? Do you think that this Wisconsin team is beatable for the Panthers?
I think they're definitely beatable. But as we know from watching Pitt all year, it rather has been kind of maddening watching them, and they're streaking, and sometimes they hang with Carolina for 30 minutes, and then other times they lose to NC State at home. So it's tough to pick, and even Vegas, I think, just came out with the spreads, and it's 1.5 point favorite for Wisconsin at this point. So I think it's kind of a toss-up, but I think it's definitely a winnable game.
Interesting. Jim, do you think that this is a favorable matchup for the Panthers, all things considered?
All things considered, they're kind of mirror images of each other. They both have veteran senior point guards that aren't super quick. Bronson Koenig, James Robinson, kind of the same deal. Then I had a tweet a little bit ago. I did a little bit of digging on Wisconsin, and you look, and their team's really, going off the success of their 3 good forwards. You have Hayes, who averages 16 and 5, Happ, who averages 12 and 7, and Brown, who averages 9 and 5. And you stack that up against Young, Artis, Jeter. So it's going to be a battle of the forwards. Neither team has a very big, great center, and neither team has really quick, awesome guards. Wisconsin's probably a little more Koenig is a bigger threat to shoot the 3 than Robinson, so that's kind of where their advantage lies. But for the most part, they're very similar teams.
Interesting. I think that they are, I agree, they're very similar. The one thing is that Nigel Hayes is a pretty reliable guy who's going to lead your team. The question is, can a Mike Young or a Jamel Artis really step it up in an NCAA tournament game and lead the team like Nigel Hayes is probably going to do for the Badgers? Now, talking about this game and the matchup, Jim, do you think that the Panthers, now I saw that you tweeted this, but do you think for the Panthers with this matchup, with everything going on, do they need to win this game for this season to be considered a success based on the matchup?
I think it would help, but overall, you kind of look at this team, you look at the makeup of this team. They were picked 10th in the league and they finished 9th. They are what they are. They kind of lack an outside shooter. They kind of lack a very good post presence. Pitt's about hitting their ceiling. They're about, my expectations were they'll be a little bit better than last year. They should make the tournament. I really thought they would have won about 2 or 3 more games. Then you look at the Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech close losses. Well, there's where those 2 more games they should have gotten. So Pitt's about had the season I thought they would have, and you kind of use this as maybe you win a game or 2 in the tournament, and you use it as a springboard in the next year. Maybe you can end the season with a little bit of excitement, show a little bit of success, and you're feeling pretty good, assuming everyone comes back.
Chris, do you think that this is a game that the Panthers need to win to consider the season a success?
Well, I mean, if you go on Twitter and ask the Pitt fan base, they need to win the championship for it to be a success. But I think it is important to win it for them to be a success. To I'll say logical fans, for it to be a success, they should win that first round game and then kind of get in, see what can happen in the second round. Obviously, playing the underdog role at that point.
JD, would you be disappointed if the Panthers lose to Wisconsin and that's their season?
I probably would be a little bit. I think probably because at times this team has looked really, really good, and it's maddening then when they just look really, really bad. They're just a complete night and day team. It really does depend on what team shows up that day. And I know that's a stereotypical thing for you to say about a lot of teams, but I truly think that's the case with Pitt. I mean, you get a game like Duke where it seems like Pitt's up to playing, a big-name team and et cetera, and then a couple days later they're against, Virginia Tech or Georgia Tech, and they allow the other team to kind of sneak up on them and, steal one from them. I like that Wisconsin is a name-brand team that's had very good recent success. I don't think this Panthers team will have any, idea that they should overlook Wisconsin or, look down on Wisconsin. I mean, one, just from the seed situation, but also Wisconsin's a well-known basketball program. And even though Bo Ryan's not there, he's a household name, and they associate, Wisconsin basketball with success. And, I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, Wisconsin's been pretty similar to Pitt in terms of, its success in the tournament up until the last couple of years where Wisconsin kind of broke through and was making a Final Four or two and, having success that way.
Got it. Now, let's look a little bit ahead. We talked about moving forward, what could happen with this squad. So let's assume that the Panthers go in and they defeat the Badgers, which is certainly not out of the realm of possibility. They're going to be the underdog, but it's possible. How far can this Panthers team go when you look at the bracket they've got? Assuming that Xavier beats the 15 seed, if Pitt beat Wisconsin, they'd have Xavier in the second round. So the question is, could they beat the Musketeers? And if that happened, could they, that would potentially lead for a huge Sweet 16 matchup in Philadelphia against the West Virginia Mountaineers. So, Chris, do you think that Pitt could feasibly beat Wisconsin and beat Xavier and make it to the Sweet 16?
I think it's possible. I mean, I wouldn't bet the house on it, obviously. I think they beat Wisconsin, and I think they got second round. But if they would happen to get by Xavier, they're not beating West Virginia. It's not going to happen. So I hate to dash everybody's hopes, but if they did happen to pull off the miracle in the second round against Xavier, I actually like their chances against Xavier more than I like their chances against West Virginia.
I absolutely, completely agree with you, even though Xavier's the higher-ranked team. JD, what do you think? Do you think that Pitt could beat Wisconsin, face Xavier, and maybe have a chance against them?
I do think Pitt has a chance against Xavier. I think back to a couple years ago when Pitt absolutely bludgeoned Colorado in the first round, and we kind of went into that matchup against Florida, and everyone kind of thought we had a chance against Florida, but it ended up just kind of turning into a buzzsaw. I think that's where you're going to see the benefit of being a 10 seed instead of that 8-9. Is I think there's a big gap between the number 1 seeds and some of the second, number 2 seeds. Teams like Villanova and Xavier, I felt were a little bit of a notch below the other teams. That's my personal opinion. But yeah, I agree with Chris that the absolute hard mountain for this team is the Sweet 16 because there's no way they're beating that West Virginia team. I'm sorry. The press Virginia is something that Pitt just cannot handle, and West Virginia's got great forwards that will absolutely kill Pitt inside. So it would be great just as a story for a game of a Sweet 16, rivalry matchup, and they haven't played in 3-4 years, but Pitt would not win that game.
I happen to completely agree with you. And in a way, as a Pitt fan, you almost don't want to see the team beat Xavier to get to that point, because I think all of us agree that West Virginia would destroy Pitt in the Sweet 16, and at that point it gets pretty embarrassing with the rivalry. So in a way, you almost want to maybe just win the game, play a close game with Xavier, and bow out before you hit the Mountaineers. Now, looking at and I completely agree with JD when you mentioned that the benefit of being the 10 seed as opposed to a 9 seed, and you talk about Florida. Now, the Florida game a couple years ago was close. Pitt destroyed Colorado. They had a chance against Florida. It was a pretty close game, but they just couldn't beat Patrick Young and Scotty Wilbekin. And there's such a massive difference between the 1 seed and the 2 seed in this particular regional, because the 1 seed is North Carolina, a team that no matter how great Pitt is playing on a day, it seems like the talent's just going to win out, and the Tar Heels would probably beat the Panthers. But Xavier, that's a team that Pitt could theoretically beat. I saw someone tweeted out the odds, technically, when you go through the statistics. Pitt beating Wisconsin, a 45.2% chance. Then you talk about getting to the Sweet 16, beating Xavier. That's a 14.5% chance. Jim, 14.5, do you think that's too high, too low, or just about right?
That's about right. Xavier, looking at Xavier, they're a team that's very guard dependent. They have a lot of guys that can break Pitt off the dribble, so that's just going to be a tough matchup. But at the end of the day, the talent level of Xavier, you look at another 2 seed, you wouldn't want to play Oklahoma, you wouldn't want to play Michigan State. But you could say you look at Xavier and you look at the Big East this year, and you said, okay, if we have to play one of the top 8 seeds, if you're Pitt. You kind of feel like you could do it. I wouldn't bet Pitt getting out of the first weekend, but theoretically it could happen. And then, talk about that West Virginia matchup down the line. I'm not, totally sold that Notre Dame couldn't beat West Virginia. We just assume we're penciling West Virginia into the Sweet 16, which I do in my bracket, but I know Notre Dame, if that matchup, say if it's a Sweet 16 against Pitt Notre Dame, does that change anyone's mind?
Personally speaking, I think it would change my mind. I think that Pitt could have a chance against Notre Dame. Obviously, they beat them earlier in the year. I certainly don't think, and I think we all agree, that West Virginia would absolutely beat Pitt. So when I mentioned that Pitt fans might want the loss against Xavier so they don't face West Virginia, that, of course, is contingent upon the Mountaineers getting there. If the Fighting Irish get to West Virginia, then a Pitt somehow, and this is very far-fetched, but a Pitt-Notre Dame game in Philadelphia would also be incredibly entertaining. JD, do you think that there's a chance that the Panthers could then face Notre Dame if they somehow got past Xavier?
I think so, just because I've actually felt Notre Dame's been a pretty good team, and when we beat them in South Bend, it was kind of a wow, that's a pretty good win. I don't know how Pitt almost blew it against Notre Dame. We don't know how good they are, but Notre Dame ended up being a pretty good team, being ranked for a little bit. Knocked off a couple of teams, especially Duke in the ACC tournament down the line. So I could definitely see, Notre Dame upsetting West Virginia. West Virginia's, had a couple early upsets in the NCAA tournament once every couple of years. But, as I say, Pitt would have absolutely no chance against West Virginia. I also remember this thing called the Backyard Brawl and 13-9 and all that stuff where sometimes you just get weird, crazy things that happen in the tournament, and teams win that aren't supposed to, and teams go on run. I mean, like that UConn team a couple of, in 2011, Butler, Florida Gulf Coast, all those teams, nobody would have expected them to win, but it's just who, gets hot at the right time and who just makes some plays that, matter. I mean, it's all hopeful and wishful thinking because that's all Pitt basketball has, in terms of this tournament, but you never know.
That's a good way to put it. Now, let's talk about the tournament as a whole. Actually, no, before we move on, let's, just with this Wisconsin game, it's going to be Friday night at, I believe, 6:50 or something?
Yep.
6:50. So Friday night at 6:50, pretty good time, and when you talk about the game, it's going to be in St. Louis. Obviously a bit closer to Wisconsin than Pittsburgh, but not a home court advantage by any stretch of the word. So let's just go around the horn and talk about a final prediction for this game. Chris, what do you think is going to happen in this game against Wisconsin on Friday?
Paul Chris Bowl, I think, goes to. I'm going to go hometown here and go with Pitt. I'm going to go with
Interesting.
Pitt, and of course they're going to make you sweat and shake and vomit bag close by because that's what Pitt does.
JD, what do you think about this Wisconsin matchup?
I agree with Chris. It's against my better judgment, but yeah, surprises Pitt. Go for it.
Jim, how about you?
I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. I'm going to say Wisconsin. They have two starters that started in the national championship game last year. I think we forget that's how far they went. So they know how to win. Nigel Hayes was kind of their third guy behind Kaminsky and the name
Decker,
escapes
Sam
me.
Decker.
Yeah, that's right. So he's very good. Koenig's a good player, so it's going to be tough. But Wisconsin, I mean, they're playing very well down the stretch, and Pitt really hasn't, with the Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech games.
I find it interesting. Jim tends to be the most optimistic one of the bunch throughout the season, especially when it comes to Pitt basketball, but he's picking the loss for the Panthers. I'm going to have to agree with Jim. I think that when it comes down to it, as he mentioned, the fact that the Panthers don't have the same amount of experience, they weren't in the tournament last year, Wisconsin was in the championship, and even though they lost Kaminsky and Decker, I think Nigel Hayes, with that experience, with that leadership, that'll prove to be the difference, that he's going to one-up a player like Jamel Artis when it comes down to it. So we'll certainly see. It should be an exciting time, and I know we can all say that it's a lot nicer for the Panthers to be in the tournament, in the big dance, than at home watching other teams in there, as we all saw last season. Now, let's talk about the tournament as a whole, because obviously this is a Pitt podcast, but this is March Madness. This is the most exciting time of the year on the sports calendar. So let's look at our brackets. I think we've all at least taken a rough draft of them. We might make a couple edits, and we all reserve the right to change our minds in the next few days. But let's start off with an upset of the tournament, a team that maybe your 12-5 upset that everyone's got to have, or even lower than that. What's a team that you think maybe in that first round, or even in the second round, say an 8 beating a 1, something like that? What's an upset that you think what's the upset that's your pick, JD?
I'm going to say Syracuse beats Dayton.
Wow.
It's not a very big upset, but
No, it's 10-7.
yeah.
Is that the best you can do? You didn't even have a 12-5?
12-5. You know what? South Dakota State's going to beat Maryland.
Okay, that's an upset. Jim, what do you think? What's your upset when you're looking at this bracket?
Okay, I'm going to go a little bit off the radar, but bear with me. I'm going to say Iona beat Iowa State. They're 13th seed. Iowa State is a little short bench. They lost last year early as a top seed. And Iona has won 12 out of 13, and I watched them play Monmouth. They're a really good team. They're very capable scorers. I think they're a fun team to watch. They might be that team that's a darling.
Interesting. When I look at it, I have to say I was this close. I had two teams that I thought were going to be that I was going to pick to go to the Sweet 16 or even the Elite 8 and make a big run. And I can't do it because those two teams are UConn and Providence. I think with Chris Dunn, Providence can do a lot, and UConn, I've just got a feeling that they are this year's going to be something special. But I can't, as much as I want to, I can't pick the Huskies over Kansas, the number one. Almost any other team, I would pick UConn, but I can't do it. And Providence over UNC, just those two teams, they're the two best teams in the country right now. I can't possibly pick either UConn or Providence to get past the second round, and so I can't do it. But I did pick my 12-5. I got Yale over Baylor. I don't know. What do you guys think?
That could happen. Yale is I don't know much about them, but Baylor always seems to be super athletic, so that's a very different kind of style of game. But the 12-5 is at least one happens a year, like at least one, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely. The 12-5 has to happen.
Yeah, Corey, I kind of agree with you about UConn. UConn fans sold some part of their soul to the devil, and he hasn't yet cashed them in on it yet because I can't. They're literally the team that just does the most in March, inexplicably, I don't. I mean, they not even did they sneak into the tournament, but they're an 8-9 seed. I forget whichever one they are.
9.
But yeah, it's. I don't see them beating Kansas, but they're a goddamn lucky team. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I want to pick it so badly, but I just don't think I can do it. Now, if they were a 10 seed in that region, say where Temple is, I'd have them beating Iowa, I'd have them beating Villanova, I'd have them making it all the way to the Elite Eight. I can't have them beating Kansas. It's one of those things that you want to pick that real long shot, and you just can't seem to do it. But speaking of long shots now, not so much of an upset, but more of a team that you think can be a dark horse. So it doesn't need to be necessarily an incredibly low-seeded team, but a team that maybe not many people expect that you think can make it to the Sweet 16 or even the Elite Eight. Chris, who's that for you?
Yeah, I didn't know quite how to. It's always hard to pick the dark horse because define a dark horse. I mean, I could sit here and say Kentucky or Utah because they're not a 1 or a 2 seed, but I think they're going to go far. I mean, Kentucky for obvious reasons. Clarion grad, Coach Calipari, obviously always scary in the tournament, and they have a ton of talent on that team. I do like Iona and AJ English. I could see them making a little bit of a run. And again, a dark horse, is that a lower seed team like Iona that gets to the Sweet 16 and that's it? Or, it depends on how you want to define it. So if I'm going to go off the radar a little bit, I'll say Iona.
Interesting. That was Jim's pick.
Yeah. And, but if we're going to just kind of go with someone who's not a 1 or a 2 seed really making a run, I would say Utah or Kentucky.
Interesting. So let's, I guess, sort of define this as either a lower seed making it to the Sweet 16, say a 7 or below, or maybe a team making it to the Elite Eight or Final Four who's not a 1 or a 2. Jim, what's that dark horse team for you? Sort of like how I mentioned UConn, but can't actually pick them. What's the team for you that you think can really make a run?
I look at that Maryland team. I know JD had them as a first-round upset, which I could totally see happening. But they're a team that has so much talent, and if they ever really put it together, they're very much capable of going into that Sweet 16 game against Kansas and beating them. I mean, Melo Trimble is a very good guard. They have Rashid Suleiman from Duke, Jake Layman, Diamond Stone, the 5-star freshman. I mean, you look at their starting 5; it's as talented as anyone's. And if there's a 4 or 5 seed that can make it to the Final Four, I think it's Maryland.
Interesting. I looked at Maryland. I mean, I saw them play Michigan State, and that was just personally, that was a game that it looked like the Terrapins should have won. They should have won, and it just didn't work out for them. They just kept missing these golden opportunities that they had. And I'll mention Maryland in a second. But first, JD, who's the dark horse team that you're looking? We know it's not Maryland, but who's the dark horse team that you're looking at that you think can make a run that not many people will see coming?
I would say either Iowa or Seton Hall. I like Iowa. Just they've been able to knock off some top 25 teams. I think they were a little underseeded in this tournament, just in general, and they pulled Villanova as their kind of leader of their pod, so to speak. So I would not be surprised if Iowa was able to upset Villanova in that fashion. I really like Seton Hall and think they were definitely underseeded as a 6, despite winning the Big East tournament. I really like blanking on his name, Isaiah Whitehead. Yes, Isaiah Whitehead's a great, phenomenal player. I kind of wonder what Sterling Gibbs is thinking after he transferred out of there and went to UConn. Obviously, UConn still made it, but Seton Hall's been having a pretty good year, and I think this is the first time they've been a top 10 seed in something like 25 years or something outrageous. So I think they're the kind of team that has the right attitude right now at this point of the season, and I think they have a pretty decent draw in terms of they face Gonzaga, and then it would be a tough matchup to beat Michigan State, but March happens.
Absolutely. Now, I like that pick a lot, and I'm going to piggyback on that one. Now, I mentioned UConn. I can't pick them just because who they're facing, but I like who Seton Hall has in the second round. I've got them beating Gonzaga, and then I've got them beating Utah. And so I've got a 6 seed heading to that level. I really like them. I just can't have them beating Michigan State because I think, and we'll get to it soon, I think that that's an incredible team. But my big one, and the reason I didn't mention this in the upset, is because this is my sort of dark horse team. I'm going to go with Hawaii. I think that Hawaii is going to upset Cal in the first round. And as I said, when watching that Maryland team against Michigan State, I don't love the Terrapins this year. I think that Hawaii, as the 13, can make it to the Sweet 16 to play Kansas, where at that point it becomes a bloodbath. But I think that Hawaii is going to be a team that makes a run to the Sweet 16 that everyone's talking about. What do you guys think?
I like
but Corey, Cal has 2 lottery picks. How could you pick that? That's all I heard anytime somebody talked about Cal was they have 2 lottery picks. They could win anybody against anybody, and they've lost 10 games this year. So, whatever.
In a not very powerful Pac-12, we should say. I mean, Oregon looks pretty good, but everyone else?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you in that sense. Yeah, I think that Charles Barkley said he felt the Pac-12 was a little underrated this year. I think it's actually a little overrated, but, East Coast bias and everything, but yeah.
One of the CBS guys, he raised an eye whenever he saw the Hawaii-Cal matchup. He thought something could happen there. So it definitely got someone's attention. I forget which one. And to go off that, what about the selection show tonight? Can we talk about how terrible it was?
We've got to talk about that. First of all, let us all hail this person who leaked the bracket, because it's undeniable that whenever that happened, when it was leaked onto Twitter early, that CBS, instead of taking all the time to interview coaches and to have the guys do the touchscreen, they just went through the brackets. They sped the entire process up. Because this is something that could be done in a half hour. Maybe you can turn it into a 1-hour show, but it was slated to be 2 hours, even though they ended up getting the bracket done a little over an hour into it.
Yeah,
it's just, I don't know if if anyone follows Pit Jess on Twitter, but she had a great tweet when she said, "God help anybody that's behind Charles Barkley at a Sheets."
We're a Wawa, as the two people from Philly.
We're a Wawa out here. But yeah, I mean, it was a complete mess, and you're correct. Let's all hail the person that leaked out the bracket early.
I feel like this has to be it when it comes to the Selection Sunday show in terms of a 2-hour event. You can't have that anymore. I mean, we know that everyone tries to drag it out, but it was just painful. It can be an hour, and you can still have some interviews and some analysis, and Charles Barkley trying to work a touch screen and figure out how they, what they do. But you can't have it be 2 hours because something like this happens. People just got completely fed up with it. I mean, we were all watching it, and that first segment when Charles Barkley was working the touch screen, that was absurdity at its finest.
It felt awkward watching it. It just felt like they were trying to stretch it out. They didn't have 2 hours worth of things to talk about. They were just basically someone made a joke. They said, how can we make this longer? Here, just give Charles Barkley a touchscreen and don't give him instructions.
Yeah.
Like, that was the first time he ever had to do it. I mean, it felt forced. It felt forced. Usually it's an hour. They get right to it. All right, here are the 1 seeds, commercial break. Here's this bracket, quick analysis, watch a few reactions from the teams jumping up and down, then commercial, then boom, boom, boom. And you can do it in an hour. The second hour, I mean, they started at 5:30. They really could have started at 6, because 5:30 to 6, they didn't accomplish anything. So I hope enough people complained, and I hope with the bracket leaking that CBS learned a lesson that it needs to be an hour. People are going crazy. They want to know if they're in or out. Just get it done in an hour. It doesn't need to be anything more.
Yeah, I don't think anybody had anything wrong with the NCAA selection show, in years prior. It was always, I think, just about an hour. They got through the brackets and they, talked about, some matchups that they liked for a little bit, and usually the last, the second half to the last 15 minutes of the show, and it was something that I didn't mind watching at all. Yeah, take an hour of my time, but I mean, the 2 hours was just ridiculous. I mean, obviously everything now is about generating ad revenue and everything, but I mean, it was, as you said, it was very clear as soon as that bracket leaked, everything got sped up, and it was fantastic. And I pour one out for the guy that leaked it because he's our national hero of the day.
Exactly. I mean, it was absolute absurdity. I mean, I'm scrolling through some of the the Twitter reactions because Twitter just buried them. And as JD said, this wasn't a problem before when it was an hour. It becomes a problem when you absolutely drag it out. One person tweeted, "Make Selection Sunday great again." I mean, it was the other person. Charles Barkley's one of those people holding up the self-checkout line because he just can't figure it out. I mean, other people, look, CBS, we've already lost 1 hour today. I mean, it was absolute nonsense. Some of this stuff was just embarrassing when it came to the broadcast. And you talk about just the entire system. It hopefully, as Jim said, hopefully they've learned their lesson. Hopefully it goes back to an hour next year because people will watch that. By 2 hours, people start to get rowdy, and you just do more harm than good. But overall, I agree. I think we all agree. Thank God for whoever leaked it because, first of all, as a Pitt fan, everyone was worried about if they were going to make it, what was going to happen. That calmed some people down. But on top of that, we could mute that awful thing on television. Now, let's head back to the bracket, and let's talk about our teams. Maybe look at the Elite Eight, who you have there, and who you've got in the who you've got advancing to the Final Four, who your regional champs are. Jim, let's start with you. Who are those teams that you've got going that far?
Okay, in the top left in the South, I like my Maryland team. Like I said, they have at least 4 NBA players on their team, and I think that matters in March.
Wait, you've
And
got them
also,
beating Kansas?
I do have them beating Kansas. I have them playing Arizona in the regional final, and I have Maryland going to the Final Four. Arizona's a tough team. This is one of Sean Miller's better coaching jobs for all he lost, but I think they have a run in them. And Villanova, they're just not reliable in March. I think they're going to bow out in the Sweet 16. Then I'm moving down to the bottom left, the West region. I have it as Baylor and Oklahoma, with Oklahoma winning. Buddy Hield is magic. That shot against West Virginia, I mean, a tenth of a second short of having a ridiculous shot. But when you watch that game, and I was watching it with a West Virginia fan, and the look on his face was priceless when it went in. It was, he knew it was going in. There was no doubt in his mind. He knew he could make that shot. He did the double clutch, and I think he's going to have a lot of magical moments like that in this tournament. Moving across the other side, I have it the East Regional Final. I have it North Carolina against West Virginia, with West Virginia winning. That's just going to be an interesting game. Carolina likes to run. West Virginia, all they do is run. But I just feel like that press is going to bother Marcus Page. He's not going to be able to get the shots off. And I like the Mountaineers going to the Final Four. And, bottom right, Midwest, I have it Virginia, Michigan State, the 2 top teams, with Michigan State winning. I know everyone's filling out their brackets right now, and they have Michigan State to the Final Four because that's automatic, but I'm going to be one of those people.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty interesting, especially some of those teams at 5 and 6 seeds heading into the Elite Eight and Final Four. JD, who are your Elite Eight picks and then the Final Four?
Real quick, I'll just kind of run through them. I have Kansas over Iowa from the South. From the West, I actually have. Hold on, losing my spot. I would say I'm gonna take Oklahoma over Duke. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I hate Duke, but I think they can get up to there. And then in terms of the East, I have UNC over. I think I'm going to have to copy Jim in terms of having West Virginia as an Elite Eight team. But I'm going to say North Carolina is going to beat them. I really like North Carolina's talent, and especially this last week, they just looked really, really good. I like just in terms of the offense, they can score so quickly. I mean, especially in the game against Pitt, in terms of Pitt would get up, a couple of points, and then all of a sudden UNC would be on a run. And it wasn't even anything Pitt was doing bad. It was just UNC just scored that quickly. I'm going to say UVA over Michigan State in the Midwest. I just really like Tony Bennett as a coach, and I think he's kind of the last 4 or 5 years, I think he's college basketball's new Jamie Dixon in terms of the style that Virginia plays, and they've had a lot of great regular season success, but it hasn't translated to the tournament yet. But I think Tony Bennett this year will break through a little bit.
It's interesting. I can't say that I have a ton of faith in Virginia. I mean, I love Tony Bennett as a coach. Like, I love Jamie Dixon and I love Mark Few. But the common denominator is that all three are great in the regular season. They haven't proved it in the NCAA tournament. And so until I see it, I can't see Virginia going all the way. Chris, what do you think about the Elite Eight teams? And then who do you have in the Final Four?
I like Oregon and Oklahoma in that bracket, and I'm going to take Oklahoma over Oregon. I'm going to go with Kansas. Spoiler alert, that's who I'm picking. So I'm going to go Kansas over Arizona, actually. And then I'm going to take Virginia and Michigan State, and in that matchup, I'm going to take Virginia. I think they play the same strong defense they always have, and I think they get just enough scoring this year to get to the Final Four. And then I'm going to go West Virginia over North Carolina. I like West Virginia to get to the Final Four as well. So it's West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kansas, and UVA for me.
Interesting. Looking at mine, I mean, again, we've talked about it throughout this. Sometimes there are teams that you'd love to pick to go to the Elite Eight, but just where they're slotted, you can't do it. And then there's a team that you don't want to have in the Elite Eight. You don't think they're that good, but there aren't any other teams that you think can beat them up until that point. Looking at my bracket in the South, there's a prime example of that. As I've mentioned a few times, UConn I love, but I just can't have them beating Kansas. Villanova I don't love, but looking at the lower part of the South region, I don't love Iowa as JD does, and I don't see Temple beating Villanova, although that'll be a fun game for everyone here in Philly. I don't think Miami's great, and I don't love Arizona. So even though I think UConn's a better team than Villanova and would beat them if they played, I've got Villanova in the Elite Eight and not UConn. But I've got Kansas over the Wildcats. Heading down to the bottom left in the West, Oregon, I don't love them, but I don't love Duke, so I've got Oregon in the Elite Eight. And then one of the matchups that I've still got the right to change my mind. I'm reserving the right to change my mind. Is Oklahoma Texas A&M. I think whoever wins that game is going to the Final Four because I don't love the Ducks. Right now, I have Texas A&M over Buddy Hield and the Sooners. I might change, but my gut reaction is that the Aggies are going to pull that off and they'll head to the Final Four. In the top right, in the East region, North Carolina, I love their talent. West Virginia, I think, again, in another region, I might have them go to the Final Four, but I think UNC is going to pull out that talent. They're not a team that I think will be stumbled by the defense from West Virginia, but we'll see. And then finally, the bottom right, the Midwest, I have actually Purdue upsetting Virginia in the Sweet 16, and so I've got Purdue in the Elite Eight along with Michigan State, and then I've got the Spartans in the Final Four. What's everyone's thoughts on my bracket and everyone else's brackets?
Purdue is definitely a team that we saw firsthand, and even this week in the Big Ten tournament is they have unique size, and that could be a problem for a lot of people. A.J. Hammonds has really turned it on. He's playing like a senior, so they're definitely a team. Like if they get squared up with Virginia, I don't know if Mike Tobey is going to be able to slow down A.J. Hammonds. He's as big as him, but he's not nearly as good, and I think he could really give him problems. So I kind of like that Purdue pick down there.
Anyone else? What do you think about, say, I know a lot of people like Oklahoma, Texas A&M. I think if that does happen, I think that's going to be a pretty good matchup.
Yeah, I really like Oklahoma and Buddy Hield. He's a phenomenal player, and the Big 12 has been probably the toughest conference in the country this year. They're, which is ironic considering they're the smallest of, the Power Five, so to speak. As I think they had maybe one less team than the ACC did in terms of the tournament, and they've got 4 or 5 less teams overall, which kind of speaks to the volume of what the Big 12 has been. And I like Oklahoma to go far in general. I think overall the tournament there's a lot of just interesting matchups just because of the styles that teams play in terms of whether they're running gun teams or slow and methodical or however it's always fun to look at a tournament from the start and then try to think back of last year how you looked at it going in and then what ended up happening. Whether it was a more chalk-filled bracket or if it was full of upsets like the last couple of years have been, or it's going to be interesting.
Chris, before we get to the Final Four, what do you think of this tournament field and the picks that everyone has made so far?
Much like my own bracket, I look forward to the first day, right around 2:30, 3 o'clock when all the tweets go out of bracket busted. It happens every year. I mean, I I can tell you mine is horrible. It just is because I picked it. So I've never really won a basketball pool that work runs or my friends run. I think I've won one in all the years that I've done it. So I can't really analyze anybody else's, but they're all probably better than mine.
Yeah, it always seems to be the person in the office pool or something like that in the family who has really no idea about college basketball who picks it correctly, and the people like us who write about it for a site like Cardiac Hill, we never seem to get a handle on who's going to win what games.
It's like they look at the mascots or the colors and like people are like, oh, I'm going to be so horrible at it. I'm like, you know what? I watch too much basketball. Like, because I'm a person that thinks Iona's going to win. They're not. They're probably not going to win. But like somewhere in the depths of my brain, I think this can happen, and it never does.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I work with an office filled with women, and the day after the tourney is announced when brackets go out, it's just amazing, and they always end up somewhere near the top. One of them always ends up near the top, and the conversations kind of go like, well, I have a friend who lives in Columbus, and she's my best friend, so I'm going to pick Ohio State to go really far, and just by a miracle it happens.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I will say that in terms of the years that Pitt has not been in the tournament, I score like 10 to 15 percentile points better. And it's not even like I'm riding Pitt like all the way. I don't know what it is, but the years that Pitt is in the tournament, I just do significantly worse overall. And it's not even like I always have Pitt to the Final Four type thing. It's just, no, Pitt didn't do what I wanted them to do, or something else crazy happened.
So I guess we shouldn't listen to JD and what he thinks about the bracket this year.
If you asked me last year, I knew what I was doing, but this year I probably won't.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And speaking of people picking brackets for odd reasons, I remember the year that Butler was an 8 seed and made it, and all that. I remember it was there was some woman somewhere in America who got the Final Four correct somehow, and it was because she liked dogs. And the Butler Bulldogs picked all the teams. It was UConn and Butler that no one really saw coming, and Kemba and all that. And Huskies and Bulldogs, and they just do it that way. And they're always the ones that win. And I don't even know why we try to get past it, why we try to analyze so much, but that's what we do. So before we wrap it up, let's talk about the Final Four. We've all given our Final Four, but now who do you think is going to the championship, and then who do you think is winning it all this year? JD, we'll start with you.
I'm going to say heavy chalk and say UNC over Kansas in the championship game, which is in no way happening, but that's what I'm going to go with.
And, of course, you all know not to listen to JD this year. So, moving on, Chris, who do you have in your championship game, and who do you have winning the whole thing?
Now I'm going to really piss off Pitt fans. I have West Virginia in the championship game, and I got Kansas beating them, though, so maybe they won't kill me too bad.
Interesting. A Big 12 matchup. Jim, what's your Final Four, and who's your champion?
I have Oklahoma over Maryland and Michigan State over West Virginia. Then you get the championship game with Buddy Hield against Denzel Valentine, and I have Michigan State on top.
Okay, well, funny enough, you and I, Jim, have the same champion, actually. So my Final Four, on the left side of the bracket, I've got Kansas and Texas A&M. I've got the Jayhawks winning out. I just think they're a well-rounded team, and I can't get myself to pick the Aggies. And then UNC Michigan State on the other side, I've got the Spartans because Denzel Valentine's great. And I'm picking Michigan State to win. I've honestly picked them the last 3 years to win it all. And I feel like one of these years I'm going to have to be right with Tom Izzo and the group of players that he keeps bringing in. So I'm going to go with Sparty. I've got a good feeling about them. I don't like picking against Tom Izzo, and I also like when a team has that guy who can really lead them. I mean, you see it with Kemba Walker in UConn or Carmelo Anthony in Syracuse, and I think Denzel Valentine can really step it up and be a leader. Conversely, it could also happen to other teams like Oklahoma with Buddy Hield, and really who knows. But I'm going to go with Michigan State. Someone tell me I'm wrong.
I run a poll and everyone loves Michigan State. They always do. I know I'm going to look at it this year, and nearly half the people are going to have Michigan State in the Final Four because how do you pick against them? You can't. They're just one of those teams you feel weird like I got to have them in the Final Four for some reason. So I'm with you.
I never doubt Izzo, so I can't really talk you out of it on that one, Corey. So.
Yeah, it definitely should. Guys, it's March Madness. Anything can happen. It's why it's so much fun, and it's going to be a really exciting time of year, both for Pitt basketball, obviously playing Wisconsin this Friday evening, but for all of college basketball, it's just a great time of year, and I know we're all going to be glued to these games. But that just about does it. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. This will go straight to YouTube, and so people can watch. We'll post it on Cardiac Hill, and we'll tweet out the link and things like that. But thank you, everyone who tuned in. Thank you to my guests, Chris Bruno, J.D. Schroeder, and Jim Hammett. So one final time, I'm Corey Cohen. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into UnScripted. We'll be back soon, but thanks so much, and happy March.